Everyone's like, oh, square foot numbers don't work. It depends on what we're talking about. Square foot number can work if you're in control of what you're building. Yeah, can you build me a house for $500 a square foot? Sure. If that's where the conversation ends, like, I'll go build you a house for $500 a square foot. It doesn't turn into, okay, this is what I want. It's like, no. You asked me if I could build you a house for $500 a square foot. I can. If the conversation is going to continue, then I'm guessing that you're going to end up much higher because you're going to want the things that I typically do.
This week we're going to talk about, we have a Modern Craftsman Circle community. So we obviously have the podcast, we have our coursework, and we have a circle community. So we've realized that the podcast is a great place. We can all share ideas. We have conversations with people. I think that it's a catalyst for conversations outside of the podcast as well. But there's certain things that we can't share on the podcast for privacy reasons, so that there's a limit to the conversation that we can have on a public forum. So the circle community for me is a great place where people can come on and ask the questions that they wouldn't necessarily ask on a public forum, like a podcast. It's a gated community, but it's all business owners. It's people who want to help each other out, who have questions and have a common goal. So we get a ton of questions on there from the users. So we pulled a handful of really great questions that we've gotten over the past week or two that I just want to dig into today to give you guys some insight as to what is being asked there. I think that they're really great questions that are applicable to all business owners, and I think that they'll be helpful to answer here live for all of you. Obviously, we will maintain the anonymity because I think that's part of it, is being on this forum, being able to ask these questions and it not be public, being that it is a gated community. So we will maintain that anonymity there. But if it's something that you're interested in, we'll put the link to that in the show notes as well. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Andersen Windows. So we have some really exciting content coming up with Andersen. One of the things we want to be interviewing in person some builders who use the Andersen product, whether it's on their own home, whether it's on their projects, why they use that. We'd love to be able to come visit you on your site. So if you're somebody in the Northeast region who loves Andersen Windows, who's using them on a cool project that we could potentially come and visit and film some content for, reach out to us. hello@moderncraftsmanpod. We want to hear your story, your experience.
hello@moderncraftsman.co.
I screw that up every single time.
You do.
It's whenever I mention the podcast. So it's hello@moderncraftsman.co. Reach out to us there. Send us an email. Let us know where you are and what your project looks like. We'd love to interview you, see your project, see why you're using Andersen, how they help shape your business, and create some cool content with you.
Yeah, and just for frame of reference, we did a founding member rate, which we actually surpassed within like week one. And so the rate increased, and then we're in our second tier, and I think I checked this morning and we're about halfway through that. So if you guys are interested in joining the community, now is the least expensive time to do that. The more people that are in there, the higher the price will be to keep it, a close-knit community.
So speaking of tiers, one of the questions was that they heard Nick talk about tier 1 space, tier 2 space, and what does that relate to? Is it a square foot cost? How are you going about making those determinations? I can easily see a client making selections that cause space to jump tiers, or worse, being right at the line. I'm fairly certain this is primarily being used for initial budgeting discussions and gets refined through Precon, but I may be misunderstanding. I'd love to get some clarity around how this works and how it's utilized.
So this is straight from our Clarity Before Construction, which is our version 2 of the pre-construction update. But the framework for the tiered pricing is really tied to if you are doing architectural drawing, or someone's doing architectural drawings, think of it as like the SD phase, which is schematic design, then DD phase, which is design development, and then CD phase, which is construction documents. And so tier 1 pricing is typically plus or minus 20% contingency. It's built from historical data. It's square foot ranges, and it's ultimately used to give a client directional number. And the more you do this for your projects, this is ultimately driven by like your know-how, like the amount of if you do bathroom renovations, like you can typically understand what a bathroom renovation is going to cost when you see it, plus or minus 20%. And this tier one, like that's what we're getting at. For us, we might do a back of the napkin, like, hey, this is a $5 million build, but that tier one is going to be a more detailed budget. Now for us, we also build out our budgeting sheet the same for everything. So essentially you're getting what we would call a tier one price. It's in the same format. It's still a ton of detail, but it really is differed by the fact that we have that 20% contingency, and there's a lot of language in our proposal or in the line items that are assumptions or allowances, or this is based on historical data, or it really is to establish that directional pricing. And then tier two is typically plus or minus 10 to 15%. And this is divisional level breakdowns with early trade input. And this is where, this is really the first time that we're getting trade or vendor input. And we're also communicating to our trades and vendors like, hey, at this point, I'm not looking for you to put hard pricing together. Now, sometimes that is hard to ask or hard for the trade to do, or it makes more sense for me to sit down and actually price this than give you high level. But we want to communicate to the trades, number one, that, hey, we're in pre-construction, this is developing, we're early, we're planning on, getting, CDs, or construction documents. But at this point, we're trying to validate that, our early pricing. And then tier three is essentially our target is to be less than 5% contingency. And it's built with committed trade pricing, and it's used to give the client a buildable number. And the goal there is that we're less than 5% contingency. We have went to all of our trades. We've gotten hard feedback on everything and hard pricing. And really, like, whether you're cost plus or fixed cost, like, this is your opportunity to know exactly what the project's going to cost. And, we operate cost plus contractually. There is a world that I see, and I've always, we talk internally about, just saying, hey, it's a fixed cost. Like, this is how much it's going to cost. The problem is like, it's too people say it's too custom. There's too many unknowns. And a lot of times that is true, because very few of our clients actually get to 100% pre-construction and all the way to a tier three pricing with no allowances or no assumptions. But if we did, we could sit down and be like, hey, listen, like, we'll carry a 3% contingency. This is exactly what it's going to cost. And here are the commitments that we can make. Now, with a bigger project that's, say, multiple years, there's going to be trades, my painter, for example, like, hey, he gives me a price. It's $100,000 to paint the house. Okay, well, he's not starting work for 18 months. So pricing is going to fluctuate over 18 months, and that's really what that 3 to 5% contingency is designed to capture, over the life of the project.
I think it's interesting for you that what you're providing from a price perspective, as far as line item, spreadsheet, scope, is similar or the same for all three tiers. It's just that it's getting more accurate, right? So you're not using as much historical data.
Let me add to that, because the format always stays the same for consistency.
Yeah.
But what we have found is that the sheet that we build is what we call our detail sheet, 2,000 line items, right? It's like, it's broken down, and it will start, from tier one, and then we'll go in there and basically you start at the top again, and then you go through and make it more detailed. But there is a schedule of value sheet, which is like 100 line items, which essentially takes each division and breaks it down into like a half a dozen lines. But then we have a cover sheet, which is like general conditions, division total by just division, and fees. So based on, the client, like it starts really, really simple. Like it will start with like, here's your total. And then here's your total based on division. And then and so as you flip, you get more and more information. But what we have found is that by packaging like that, it gives the client the information they need very quickly, but then the opportunity to go and then look, really granular in the back. But yeah, keeping it consistent across all tiers.
Yeah, and I think that the big difference there, if you're curious what the difference is between tiers for me, and my system isn't the exact same. It's similar, but it just winds up being similar because that's the way that we're going through, right? You're revising budget, you're revising scope, you're getting more details. It's a time commitment. Tier 1 is generally going to take less time than Tier 2, Tier 3 for me, just because instead of taking numbers or plugging numbers or pulling numbers from historical context, we're digging into the details more and understanding the job at a much deeper level. So generally, the tiers for me are saving me from a time perspective where it's like I can turn you around Tier 1 very quickly without a ton of information. Tier 2, I'm going to need more information. It's going to take more time. We're going to have to start engaging subcontractors. Tier 3 is basically you're ready to go to contract. So for me, the tiers, obviously there is an accuracy with the tiering, but it's also just a time perspective. The further you get in this process, the more information you're going to have to gather and the more time you're going to have to invest in it.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like the goal is to, for us, the goal is to be able to explain to a client exactly what the project's going to take. And, I think, I can't remember if we talked about this on the last episode, but the reality is, even in Tier 1, if someone was like, hey, can you build this house for $5 million? It's like, yeah. If that's where the conversation ends, like I can build you a house for $5 million. But if you're going to say, I want you to, can you build this for $5 million? And we're going to continue refining the design, that doesn't work, which is the whole point of, continuing to work through the tiers. I will say, I think what's important to note is where we see the biggest, we'll say, upset in the process is from DD to CD, because you are now getting into the actual construction of details. And if you're not helping guide the design team on how to build build the specific project, that's where, an architect, as good or bad as they might not be thinking about it the most efficient way from a construction standpoint. Like it accomplishes the detail, but it might be very complicated or very difficult to actually do. And that's why your role in that is so important, where it's, okay, well, what was your assumption during SD and DD? Like, what was your assumption on how you would execute this detail? And if you're not communicating that, then it's your assumption means literally nothing, and you're going back to pricing the project from scratch.
Yep. So the other thing to note there is you have to figure out a system that works for you, and your Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 could be completely separate. It's just having that system in place to be able to communicate this to your clients and something that works for you. If it's just as simple as Tier 1 is a square foot pricing based on historical data, and we're not providing you with a 2,000 line item schedule values, like that's okay. It doesn't matter. Just communicate that up front to your clients. You just have to find a system that works for you.
Yeah, again, like square foot, everyone's like, oh, square foot numbers don't work. It's like, it depends on what we're talking about. Square foot number can work if you're in control of what you're building.
Yeah.
Can you build me a house
if you know what it costs you?
Yeah. Can you build me a house for $500 a square foot? Sure. Like, if that's where the conversation ends, like, I'll go build you a house for $500 a square foot. But it doesn't turn into, okay, this is what I want. It's like, no. You asked me if I could build you a house for $500 a square foot. I can. But if the conversation is going to continue, then I'm guessing that you're going to end up much higher because you're going to want the things that I typically do.
Yeah. So speaking of cost plus, and I think this is a great conversation. I know we've spoken a bunch about this at CCS and people are questioning this, but the question is, we are cost plus. So we charge hourly for our time plus a fee on all other costs. Historically, we have not charged the fee on our hourly rates. As part of our owner agreement, we have an exhibit that lists our rates and our fees for our labor. This number has typically been our burden rate plus our fee. Our client just sees the final number and we don't add anything to that. We're wondering, what do you do? Do you charge your fee on your burden rate? Do you mark up your burden rate and charge that amount? Do you mark up your burden rate and charge your fee on top of that? Something else entirely. So I think this is an interesting conversation, especially the way that you do things, Nick. For me, I'm time and material. So mine is a loaded labor rate. So I'm clearly defining all of our labor rates at contract, and that's a loaded rate. So it includes all of our labor burden, it includes all of our profit, all of our markup, all of our overhead. So the rate that I am defining in contract for myself for labor is that there's no fee getting applied to that. That's a fully loaded labor rate. So that has to encompass all of that. When you're cost plus, there's a couple of different ways to do that from an optics perspective to make sure that you're getting the margins that you need and that your markup actually makes sense. So I know that, Nick, you're using a market rate, which I think is interesting that some people don't fully understand.
Yeah, so we charge, we essentially charge a market rate for each position in our company. And what we determined was a market rate. And I think carpenters are a good example of, or a good use, or a good example to walk through. So we can hire a 1099 carpenter for, say, anywhere from 75 to, or maybe 55 to $100 an hour. And, obviously based on experience and skill set. But let's just use $75 an hour as an example. We pay them as a 1099, like, hey, we need you to do carpentry for a couple weeks. We pay them $75 an hour. That's their rate. And since they're a sub, we take that and then we mark that up and we add our fee to it and we bill that to the client. We do the same thing for our in-house carpenters, meaning that we will charge the same hourly rate as what it would cost us to hire a 1099 trade, rather than just the burden rate. Now, I want to be careful in saying this because contractually, if you're cost plus, the whole point is to charge your cost plus a fee, and your cost would be your burdened rate for that labor, which, I've shared before, but like I was essentially taken by a client and I wrote them a 6-figure check back because we didn't have this defined in our contract. But in our contract now, we define the rate for each role in the company. So again, using the $75 as an example, like all carpenters build out $75 per hour. Now, I had one client that said, are you, that straight up asked, like, are you marking up your carpenter's hourly rate, then charging me a fee on top of that? And I said, yes. And they said, well, you're double dipping. And I said, sure. And they're like, well, I just don't feel like, I don't feel like that's fair that you would charge, make a profit on the labor and then a fee on top of that. I said, well, what I could do is I could just sub all the carpentry out and you'll pay the exact same amount of money, but at least I'm not making more money.
Yeah.
And the client was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, I would prefer your guys to do the work. I said, right, like we're charging a market rate for these guys. The additional profit I make by having my carpenters do the work is the investment. Like, that's the reward I get as a business for taking the risk of having additional employees, for training them, for everything that I'm doing within the company to retain them, to hire them. That is the benefit of being in business, is you make a profit. So ultimately, like that, the client was like, no, it totally makes sense. That's fair. Now,
so essentially what they're wanting you to do is say, okay, this is the cost of my employee. That's going to be in our schedule of values, or when you're billing, here's the cost of our employee, and then your whatever your builder's fee is, which is your overhead and your profit, they just want that applied to that cost. But what you're doing is you're taking your burden and your markup from the rate that you're getting from a subcontracted carpenter, and then applying that builder's fee on top of it. So that's the issue, quote, issue that they're having there. But as long as that's explicitly defined as the market rate in your contract, and that builder's fee, which is again your overhead and profit, is getting applied to that, that's a non-issue. And what that, like, that's the same thing for me with the loaded labor rate. I have different rates for different people who are working for me, and what that helps me do is not have to determine exactly who's doing what trade when I go to budget for that project. So I give myself a little bit of wiggle room to make sure that I can, and that's just the way that I do things, where it's like, hey, here's the range of who I can hire to do this project to meet your budget, meet your needs, execute at the quality that we need to, and I can plug and play that labor rate in there to make it all work out on the back end.
Let me explain. One follow-up question that comes up is, are you charging all your carpenters the same rate, even if you pay them different? And for us, yes. So, and the thought process behind that, say, we have two carpenters. One, is making, say $5 more per hour. They're still both of them are being billed out at the same rate. And my mindset behind that is, the guy that's making $5 per hour is making less mistakes. Yeah. So the guy that's making $5 an hour less is probably making more mistakes, or is just less efficient. So I am paying, even though I'm making a larger margin on that employee that makes less, that margin gets eaten up by rework or additional training or just the cost of inefficiency. So that margin shrinks as they get better, but that's because they're that margin is 100% ours, rather than going into the reinvestment of that particular individual. Now, there's also the argument where it's like, okay, well, why charge market rate? Why not charge more than market rate? You should. Like, if your guys are better than what is market, or you are selling a product that is better than what is quote unquote market, then yeah, there should be a premium to that. But the point is like, you are billing this, you are taking the risk by having employees. You're doing all of that brain damage of making sure that you're, legitimate in terms of having these W-2 employees and all of the things that go along with that. You need to be rewarded for that, and that's what that additional markup really is. But it's really critical to have it specifically called out in your contract.
Yeah, that's where you'll get yourself into trouble. And for me, it's similar, right? Where if I were just doing carpentry, it would be simpler to have a single rate for carpentry. But we could start the day doing layout and then go to framing and then be doing drywall and then painting later. So then, rather having that broken into all of these different sub trades, I just have different labor rates that encompass all of that. And it comes down to the same thing: experience, productivity, level of execution. So I have a couple of different labor rates that I can make almost any job work based on whatever the job's calling for at that point. But yeah, you'll get yourself into trouble there if you're not explicitly calling out those labor rates in your contract beforehand. So that's definitely what you need to be doing there. And once a client signs off on that, I mean, that's what's going to be protecting you. It's not necessarily, does this align with the exact market rate? This is a market rate that works for us based on our projects and the work that we're doing. But once that's clearly defined in your contract, that's what's protecting you there.
I'm going to give you guys some just like high level math. By the way, if you want this calculator, we put together a labor rate calculator. It's completely free. It's either on moderncraftsman.co, or if you join the Circle community, it's in there. But say you pay a carpenter $38 an hour. You have payroll taxes, you have insurance benefits for health, dental, vision, you have a 401k match, you pay for their cell phone, they have a company vehicle, they have software licenses because they, are part of the company. They have you pay workers' comp on that employee, you pay general liability on that employee. Then you also have company holidays, maybe 10 holidays a year. You also have PTO. And on all of the things I just rattled off, so between $38 an hour plus all of that, that ends up costing me $61 an hour. Like that's that is my actual cost. So say I bill that person out at $75 an hour, I'm really making $14 an hour, not the almost 40 that you would think based on just the hourly rate itself. But if you want that calculator, it's on our website, moderncraftsman.co, and it's also in the Circle community. And you can do this math and figure out like really what your labor costs are.
So the next question, and I actually discuss this a lot with consulting clients, but hey, I was curious how you went about your first office hire. I'm really getting tired of typing up every estimate, invoice, contract, tracking things down, trying to be on sites as well. I don't know if I even have 40 hours of office work a week, but I do know that I have enough that I'd like help. What position did you hire first? What qualifications should I look for? I feel like I still have to estimate and do important tasks, but take some off of my plate. So I think this is really interesting and something that I suggest to a lot of consulting clients that I have who are smaller owner-operators, where for years the most typical thing to do was hire a helper, right? Put somebody else in the van, try and do 2x the amount of work, do 2 jobs at once, 1.5 jobs at once. And I think that one of the biggest issues that we have as smaller companies is just capturing our time or being accountable for the time that we're spending, holding our clients accountable for that time that we're spending. And part of that with overhead, right, as you're smaller, is am I capturing the actual cost of doing business, right? The emailing, the communication, the meetings, how are you paying for that? And that needs to be tied to either a markup on the work that you're doing. It needs to be tied to an overhead, or you can just hire somebody to do some of that work. So it was always, when I started my business, right, I need to be able to do more work. I'm going to hire somebody to help me in the field. And I think that a really interesting and valuable take is, rather than hiring that first hire being in the field, to hire somebody to take off some of the back end or the office work from you that frees you up to do more work in the field. So you're not working at nights, you're not working at weekends, you're not working 12, 14-hour days. You can spend your 8, 10 hours a day on site, invoice for it. Now you have a direct cost for the back end office work that's related to your business, to understand how to integrate that into whatever the cost of you doing business is. And it's not just a cost that you're conceding by doing it after hours and saying, I can't tie this into my cost of doing business. People aren't going to pay this. Once it's an actual direct cost for your business, you're going to compensate for that. So for me, one of the first hires was just hiring somebody to do all of the QuickBooks end of things, balance my books, go through my credit card receipts, itemize everything. That's something that I did for a long time, where it was end of month, credit cards were due, and I'm going through it. I'm trying to organize receipts and itemize costs. And I would spend hours doing that. I was spending however much money each month on a QuickBooks membership. And when I finally passed that off to a part-time bookkeeper, it actually cost me less per month than the fee that I was paying just to have the software, and I wasn't spending any time. And then that was a direct cost that I could say, hey, throughout the year, I'm spending roughly this amount monthly. and yearly for the back end office of my business, and able to just tie that into my overhead of running a business. Hey, if I did $500,000 worth of sales, this is what I was paying for my bookkeeper. If I did $1 million worth of sales, the cost went up. This is what I was paying my bookkeeper. And I could just apply that to my hourly rate when I was budgeting for jobs. So to me, that was an amazing first hire, and it also freed me up to not have to work nights, not have to work weekends, and just be able to spend my time being productive, swinging a hammer. And that was even more important when I switched to time and material, because a lot of my clients aren't willing to pay me if they don't see me producing work on site, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm time and material and I show up at 10 because I just did 2 hours of office work for that job, that's a tough conversation with the client. Hey, why did you charge me 8 hours this day? You didn't show up till 10 in the morning. It's like, hey, well, I was doing office work for your job. Now that's just tied to my overhead, right? So that's a percentage of every hour that I work, I'm capturing that cost, so I don't have to have that conversation. Whatever hours I'm working, I can show up at 8 a.m. I can charge them for it. If I show up at 10 a.m., right, it's already captured within my hourly cost, so I don't have to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add to that is, at the end of the day, whatever you can do to focus on the thing that actually moves the needle in the business, and whatever else you can delegate. And for me, I mean, the accounting is definitely one that has always been something that I've needed someone else to do. Mm-hmm. And more recently, I hired an assistant just to handle like emailing and scheduling and just general admin, where when I first did it, I was like, I don't know if this is going to be enough to actually justify it. But now it's like, I don't have emails that go weeks without responses. If we're trying to get a meeting scheduled, like there's no back and forth. Caitlin just handles it. Yeah. And so for me, like that has allowed, and that's like the goal. And her and I talk about it weekly, but that's the goal, is that I'm not in my inbox trying to coordinate meetings. I am solely focused on like the deep work, or, moving a project forward or moving the needle on something. And she is handling like all the admin side of it. So, just generally speaking, whether it's, if you're swinging a hammer on site and like that's what you like to do, find that person that can help with the back end, like Tyler said, and it might be the opposite way, where it's, maybe you want to be in the back end and run the office and find someone to replace you in the field. It's completely individual dependent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing to consider is this doesn't have to be a full-time position, right? This member here, this circle member, was saying, I don't think I have 40 hours worth of work. I've never had 40 hours worth of office work in my life for my business. So the woman that I use is part-time. She lives somewhat local, and I think I've met her in person once or twice in the past 10 years. Everything is done virtually. The only thing it requires is every now and then, hey, what was this check for? Hey, what was this expense? Just so that she can itemize it correctly and allocate it to the correct space within my business. And then I get a invoice every month that I have to cut a check for. But it is a very small cost. I would say throughout the course of the year, minus tax season, it might be $100 a month that I'm paying somebody to do that. So it's a no-brainer for me to have somebody handle all of that. Obviously, my business is small. There's not a ton of transactions and everything else, but it's still, to me, it would cost me substantially more than that for the business, just with my time and whatever software I needed to be able to do that. So it's not somebody that needs to be full-time. A lot of times that position can be remote. So ask around. My bookkeeper, which Nick and I actually just ran into, I have an email from her. She is close to retirement age, so she's gotten rid of a bunch of clients, and it's like, well, how do I find somebody? Well, I know that shortly here she's going to be retiring, so I've just been asking her, hey, is there somebody that you can recommend? Are there other builders that you work with that are going to be using somebody? Can you help refer me to someone? So just ask around. There's a lot of people who do this that you'd be surprised are looking for part-time work to be able to help you with this stuff. I met her in person. I made sure that it was somebody I trust just from who else she was working with, and then I didn't have to worry about opening up the books to my company to somebody that I didn't really know. So the next question, this one's a longer one, but I need to improve my lead gen stack. The home I was telling you about worked really well on the surface, but now I'm starting to realize that 85% of those leads were dead weight. How do I attract better, or the home show? So this person was marketing a bunch of and trying to draw a bunch of leads from a home show. So he's starting to realize that 85% of those leads were dead weight. How do I attract better leads? Here's everything that he's tried so far. Developed a sales process, lead qualification, discovery call, in-home consult, proposal, Zoom, and it's just wound up being a dead end for him. The home show generated a handful of leads for him, but really it was a very small percentage, maybe 1 to 3% return on them. Their next idea was to research recently sold public real estate listings and cold call the buyer's agent, seeing if they could potentially get a hold of their client. Local networking clubs, I think there's a lot of people who join them. I feel they're less prevalent now than they've been in the past. Possibly getting on and advertising with some of the bigger names out there like Hal's, updating the website, posting to social. So the first thing to consider when you're looking to develop leads, you have to analyze your own business. You have to understand what makes you money, what type of jobs you need to be doing, and develop that client profile based on what works for your business. You're not going to be able to figure out who your customer is, who your client is. You're not going to understand who to market to if you don't understand your business, what makes you money, the type of jobs that you can execute well, and the type of jobs that gain you the best margins on your business. So for me, it'd be doing a deep dive into who you are, to better understand your business, to better understand who your client is, and then it's focusing on your online and your offline lead generation, right? What are you doing online? How's your website performing? Do you have SEO in place? Do you have somebody running that? How are you promoting yourself through social media? How are you networking offline with other contractors, with subcontractors, with architects, with engineers, with people in your community? But for me, the big thing, and Nick, you may be able to speak to this, the big thing for me that I think is really, really important is to have a proper website and proper SEO for your website to make sure that you're coming up in local hits on the internet. Like that, if you're going to spend your money and you want a return on that, you have to be relevant online. You have to be relevant in the digital world.
So I'm going to an event tonight and for the next 2 days, and it's my sole focus of this event is to like really work on our lead flow and what that looks like and how to, increase the qualified leads. But I've been doing a lot of work on this for the last couple of months, so I'll share my thoughts on this. Number one, the dead weight that he is talking about in his message, I think is largely due to the fact that he's just spending too much time with an unqualified lead and trying to convert them. And I think, the faster you can disqualify someone, the less weight they will carry in the overarching kind of formula of that, right? In the sense that if you can, there's so many ways to that, but like, whether the website form, I think the website form should be very simple, where it's like you get a ton of people into your CRM, but there should be like, in my opinion, an automated follow-up or like a templated follow-up that then asks them a handful of questions that will determine whether or not they're qualified or not. And that should be like an automatic thing where it's like I based on this, I'm qualifying or disqualifying them. And that's going to require you to really understand who you want to be building for, and kind of getting out of your own way, in the sense that, when rather than chasing every lead and trying to convert them, like realize like that person is not a good fit for us. Even though like right now I need the project, like taking on, this is easier said than done. Trust me, I've made this mistake, but it's easier. It would be better for you to focus more of your energy going to chase a qualified lead than trying to force someone that is not a qualified lead into your process, because it will just suck the life out of you and your business, and like ultimately in the bigger picture just hurt you more than it's helping. Now, the other side of it, so like finding a way to fast track the qualification disqualification, I think is really, really important in this process. The top of funnel, where it's like, hey, I don't feel like I'm getting enough qualified leads, when you measure it, and I'm going to give you, I pulled up some of my numbers, but when you measure it, it's really clear kind of what you have to do. So I started measuring, how many people are filling out the form on our website, how many phone calls are we getting, and how many direct emails and or referrals are we getting. And with those numbers, then we can look at like, all right, out of those, like what's actually converting. And since we launched our website, our SEO has been kind of screwed up. And I can tell you, like, I'm looking at Q1 of this year, which our numbers are significantly down from last year on, and I'm going to walk through like what these numbers mean. So in Q1, we had a total of 123 new email lists come into our CRM. That is someone that filled out the form or somehow ended up in our CRM. Out of that, 7 of them were like what we call live emails, meaning like potential opportunities that like we flagged as like, okay, like let's talk to them. Based on those 7, 6 of them converted into a phone call, meaning like, all right, one of them was disqualified after that email. And out of those 6 phone calls, 2 of them turned into potential opportunities. So I'm already like less than 2% at this point. And out of those 2 opportunities, 0 of them converted into pre-construction. So Q1, like, my target is signing 2 pre-construction agreements a quarter, failed, like didn't do it. And that's largely, and now when I look at last year our numbers started at 239, which is 116 more emails that came in on our Q1 of 2025, which converted into 3 pre-constructions. So it's a volume game at the top where it's like you want more and more people, but with the caveat that you want more and more people that are going to convert, where it's like, I would argue that last year, 239, that number's probably skewed because we weren't separating the spam stuff that was coming in, where now we're trying to separate spam entirely and not even count that towards our emails. But my point being is like, you get more people into your funnel that are coming there because they want to build or they want to renovate. And this goes back to just marketing, to what you were saying, Tyler. It's like, being part of, communities, being more active on social media, promoting on different platforms, like everything he rattled off in that message, like, hey, here are all the things I've tried. I'm going to make the assumption when he says tried, like I've tried, they didn't work. It's like, no, you keep doing it. Yeah. Like it's not I'm trying, why aren't I seeing a return? It's like, well, you are, like you probably are, you're probably just not measuring it. And the time that 123 people enter that top of funnel and get down to like maybe signing a Precon could be months or years. But like you got to keep that constantly flowing. And I think the best number to look at, first is how many people are coming in at the top, and can I get more people in the top that, because, arguably if I'm doing 123 emails a quarter, like if I could somehow double that, that means I'm doing 14 phone calls, instead of 7.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing to realize also is that between last year and this year, that's only a 1.2% difference in conversion. Like to get 3 out of 239 versus 0 out of 116 or whatever you have, that like you're going from 0% to 1.21 or something percent. So it's not as though it's a drastic change, right? Like it's not as though, okay, I had twice as many leads come in. Now I'm going to have so many more pre-construction. Like between last year and this year, the conversion rate is within 1%. Obviously, 0 just seems like a much more glaring issue, but it's not as though even with 239 leads that you're at 10% conversion rate. You're still a very, very low conversion rate. So that's not like, when I see that, it's, nothing worked out this quarter, but it's not as though what you're doing is failing, or that it's even that much different that it's been in past. The big difference is that you're just not getting as many leads. For you, that may not matter as much because you are converting such a small percentage of them. It just takes one. For somebody who needs a dozen conversions a month, like those, what you need to do may change significantly to get that. You may need to 10x the amount, 20x the amount of leads that are coming in your plate, and that's when you really need to focus on that top of funnel and how you are actually being searchable, what your exposure is online, what your SEO looks like, how you're coming up in any sort of local network. So it really depends on your business. But even for what this guy's saying, as far as what you're getting and what percentage you're getting, to me, it seems more like the issue for him is the amount of time that he's spending on qualifying these leads. Like you're saying, if you had a system for qualifying those 100 leads and you have 1 to 3 potential jobs, you're at 1 to 3% conversion. That's really that's not terrible. You don't want, depending on your business, you don't want 20-30% conversion rate. So to me, that's not terrible. The conversion rate's not terrible. It's just systemizing what you're doing to make sure that as they're working their way through that funnel, it's more automated and it's not requiring a ton of resources and input on your end.
I think two additional points here. Going from like doubling the amount of input at the top and then converting that into 3 pre-construction agreements, like to your point, is a very small percentage in terms of change on like what converts, but it's $150,000 in additional revenue. So it's like, sure, like it's a small percentage of change, but it's like a drastic, number to add to the bottom line. And it's like, so, I think, again, like important for me is like,
especially considering that if you have the systems in place, that's not really increasing your overhead.
Right. So I think the other thing here is, we're talking about like getting leads in the door and qualifying them, but then it's a matter of like, all right, how do I convert them when it is a qualified lead and get them to work with me? And that becomes like the bottom, where it's like, what is your unique selling proposition? Like, how are you getting a client to work with you? And like, that's a totally different subject. But I think for us, there's a lot that goes into our content around education and who we are. But transparently, we are constantly put up against I would say the top 5 big names in Boston, and we lose a lot of projects just because people associate time in business with the risk or how many projects we've done compared to someone else. And it's made me really think and refine our process in terms of like when we're sitting in a sales meeting with a potential client and answering questions where, you know, we're not lying, but, you know, we might be answering them in a much different way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'll give you an example around that. Like, rather than someone saying, "Hey, how many homes have you built?" Rather than me only answering like, "Hey, we've only built X amount of homes," meaning like what NS Builders has done, I'm going to look at it a little bit more globally. It's like, well, when you look at us, you know, collectively as a team, you know, we've built 100 and blank homes, whatever it is. And because ultimately, there's a couple things. Ultimately, we're the general contractor. I could be in a business for a year or 12 years. You know, the team I have been in the industry for 20, 30, 40 years. The subs I have, same thing. Like we're all, ultimately the difference is what's the name of the business and who's running the business. Mm-hmm. The rest of it is like relatively the same, you know, in terms of people. And then it just comes down to like process. Like what is our process? And we just communicate that up front. Like, hey, we're designed to be really white glove. And if that's what you're looking for, like we're a great fit. If you're not, then we're not going to be a good fit because you're going to feel as though it's not a wise financial investment for you. You know, we met with a client yesterday for a potential project, and we just right up front, like, hey, this is our process. We're designed to be very white glove. And they were like, Nick, this is why we're on the phone with you. Like we had a not so great experience with the last builder. We felt as though we had to always be on site and like managing who was here and like managing the project. I'm like, no, that's not at all how this goes. Like for us, like we spend the time in pre-construction, we sign a contract, and you go back to work, deal with your family, and we are like, we're moving. And if we have to tap you in for information, we will.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point there. As well. So the last question that I pulled for this week here, I think it is interesting and that most people probably don't have in place, and it's something that's very important. But he said he's coming from the commercial sector and he's used to issuing subcontracts to any sub for any project. Some of these projects were only a few months long. Some were over a year. So his question is, why in the residential sector is it commonplace to issue a master subcontractor agreement with an individual sub on a yearly basis and then issue job-specific work orders? Does anyone have a template master agreement and a job-specific agreement they would be willing to share? I have a lengthy subcontract agreement that came from his external lawyer. So most of that's coming just from AIA, and that's a great place if you want a master agreement and a subcontractor agreement, as long as your individual work orders. But if you guys and girls aren't aware of this, typically in residential, you're going to have this master agreement, which is going to be all of the conditions, general conditions for the relationship with that subcontractor for the year, right? So the idea is if you're using them on multiple projects, if you're using them for multiple jobs, that you don't have to have them sign this lengthy contract every single time with every single detail of that agreement spelled out. You can have them sign a master agreement that for every project that they sign on with you, that you hire them for, those general conditions are going to be the same for every project. And then you have these job-specific work orders where it's, hey, this is unique to this project, which is going to be obviously like the scope of work for that, the cost, if there's rental equipment, everything that's just specific to that job, so that they're not having to sign this massive contract every single time that you want them to bid a job for you, to do a job for you. So not everyone's doing that. A lot of times it's informal. A lot of times there's no contract in place in general. But if you want to be legit, typically for AIA standards, it's going to be that master agreement, which you develop. And that's going to be like this overarching umbrella contract that's going to dictate all of the terms of the agreement that you have with this person that's not job specific, and then for each individual project you're going to have a work order for that sub. So if you don't have that and that's something that you want to look into, the AIA, you can purchase a lot of their contracts or their templates for the contracts, which would be a good starting point for you. I think a lot of times they can be, I don't want to say too robust.
Can I stop you?
Yeah.
I uploaded our version to the resource library in our community.
All right. There you go.
So you can have it. Like, it's there. You can just take it.
But that's the one thing I found with most of the AIA documents. It's like sometimes it depends on the type of work you do, and it's just like any contract where, like, yeah, you want to protect yourself legally, but this is also a relationship that you have with people and your subcontractors. So it's just making sure that it's not so robust that it's like, I'm not signing this with you. Like, this puts all liability on me. I'm not protected here as well. And like, the conversation is, no, this is in place to protect both of us. But I think that sometimes if you're looking to implement something like this, it might be easier to ease in with something that's not quite as robust and legal. But yeah, Nick's got an answer for you there.
Yeah.
So that's where you can find that. But if you're looking to do it the right way, like, that's the way that residential is typically doing it.
Yeah, and I will say, like, our trades, we had a couple of reach out. It was like, Nick, this is by far the most, like, the lengthiest subcontractor agreement I've ever signed. Like, and we have only one contractor was like, I don't feel comfortable signing this. And I was like, hey, let's meet at my office. You know, I'll walk you through it. He's like, I just don't have I don't understand what I'm looking at.
Yep.
So we sat down and we started reading it, and it's like, you know, there's a lot there, but we got to like page 3, and they were like, never mind, like, this all makes sense.
And that's the nice thing about having, like, the master agreement, that's once, right?
Yeah,
they're not having to sign that for each work order.
Exactly. It's just like, hey, this is the agreement. Like, these are all the things that we're agreeing. And if you guys, if you take what the template I have, like, you should be sending it to your lawyer, your counsel. If you need a construction lawyer, like, happy to make an introduction or share some examples of it. But ultimately, like, this is, like, everything should be catered to your business anyway. But it's a good starting point and a good template to really understand, like, the importance of it. It's also, you know, we actually took the AI version and modified it, and made sure it was, like, really equally protecting the client, us, and our subs, rather than, like, just largely one-sided. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, we use a similar contract for our clients, and a couple years ago, we had a client send it back with a couple red lines, and they were generally, like, you know, pretty light touch on, like, what needed to be updated. And I sent it back, and I was like, hey, I don't know if you want your lawyer to look at this, but here's my suggestions on what you asked for. And he was like, I don't have a lawyer looking at it. I just threw it to chat GPT, and I was like, make sure that this is fair for both sides.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, great. And I'm like, well, it should be fair. And he goes, yeah, that looks fair. All right, let's go. And so my point in mentioning that is just, like, it should be fair. It should be fair for both sides, and it should protect everyone. And a lot of it just comes down to, like, liability and making sure the liability falls on the right person for the right situation.
Yep. So if you guys are interested in this circle community, we'll put the link to that in the show notes. And it should be in the link tree on our Instagram. So Modern Craftsman Pod, you can get the link tree there. We have a lot of really great builders in there, men and women. It's a pretty engaging community. Really great questions. A ton of people looking to help. I'm surprised. So I get email alerts when a question pops up, and I'll look. And by the time I get onto the circle community to see what the question is, poke around, answer some questions, there's already 6 to 10 responses in there. So it's a very active community of people who are willing to help and asking questions. And a lot of people who are getting a hold of me for consulting and everything else, and they're like, well, what if I need more? What if I want other perspective? I'm like, check out the circle community. It's probably less money than doing consulting with me, and you're going to get the insight of myself as well as a ton of other people. So Again, we'll post that link in the show notes, but you can also find it in the link tree on our Instagram, which is Modern Craftsman Pod. So, yeah, thanks.